Small Town Redditors, what's the weirdest unsolved crime in your town? Old or new? In my hometown there was a rich family who were rumored to have gotten their gains during WWII by working with the Japanese forces. They had large estates, mansions, and were just ridiculously rich. One day the entire family disappeared, and their houses and most of their properties were either burned down, destroyed, or missing. No one knows where they went, or if they are even alive. The most likely explanation was that they lost a lot of favors and money, so they either ran away or killed themselves deep in the mountains. They also left large amounts of land which were then given to either their previous owners or new owners. No other family member has returned, and this was about 30 years ago when it happened. A family of about 20, and they just disappeared overnight. Story from my grandpa. Small farm town Nebraska is in the 60s. A guy was found, burnt alive in his car, hands wire tied to the steering wheel. It ruled as a suicide. Most of the town assumed that the guy owed gambling debts to some mob in Chicago or the like, and the guy wasn't exactly loved in the small town, so there was no real looking into it. Man got kicked out of a bar 3 years ago this December and went missing. Nobody has come forward with tips at all. He went missing from a fairly busy part of town too. This has happened a number of times in the Boston area. Young able-bodied people, mostly men, disappear from bars or clubs and are eventually found in the harbor, the river, or another body of water. There's a lot of crazy conspiracy theories and talk of a serial killer, but it seems to be just a combination of alcohol, the dark, and an unfamiliarity with the area. They make a string of poor choices, wind up too close to the water, then fall in and drown when there's nobody around to notice. About 30 years ago a refuse worker found the badly burned body of an 18-month-old boy amongst the bags and recycling. Forensics deduced that due to the condition of his liver he died less than a week before his body was found. Hospital and medical records were used to establish that nobody in the county was missing a child. He doesn't have a name on his gravestone. Back in 2001, a friend of my friend had been secretly chatting online with a guy from Canada. They had made plans to meet up in Windsor or Detroit. A few days later, her body was found dumped in the woods. After doing some digging, they got a hold of the Canadian guy. He said he went to meet her, but she never showed, so he assumed she had stood him up. His story checked out. One suspect was this co-worker, but a few months later he did a murder-suicide to his mom, so they could never get the truth out of him. It's been a cold case ever since. Pretty recent January this year. I'm in a village, so it's even smaller. I live right next to a river, and one day after rain my grandpa went searching for snails, but he found a head still with some flesh. A neighbor had also found an arm around the same time. The police were called. They found the body and a few dogs chewing on it, but it was in a bag hanging from a tree above the river. At first it was assumed it was from the big city thrown into the river, but no, it's hanging from the damn tree. The weirdest thing is that the woman was not from the village itself. A few years ago in my town an old man was sitting in his car at 5 AM waiting for the newspapers for his route to be dropped off. He was parked on the main street, but it would have been empty that early in the morning. It was a warm summer morning, so he had his window open. As he waited, someone rolled up on a bike and whacked him multiple times in the face with a machete and rode off. The old guy was able to drive himself to the hospital and ended up being physically fine, despite some pretty horrific looking wounds, but the attacker was never found. This was a few years ago and there has been zero follow-up. It's one of those inexplicable things that stuck with for the last few years since it happened. Who would do something like that? I have to assume it was somebody high on something. I hope he or she, let's face it, likelier he gets what's coming to him. The sister of the widow is my friend. Here's a story from the newspaper. Jeremy C. Turner was found dead alone in his home at 202E Railroad Street in Elliott on May 8, 2018 after firefighters from 4 agencies were called there to extinguish a major fire that had engulfed it, while an autopsy showed that soot was present in Mr. Turner's airways, indicating he was alive at the time of the fire. It was determined that the official cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Flessner said that Dr. Shipping Bayo, the pathologist who performed the autopsy, found that Mr. Turner suffered a bullet wound that entered the left side and exited the right side of his head. The bullet wound was not immediately apparent. However, even on radiological examination, due to the body's badly burned condition, the wounds were found only after Bayo excised the scalp to examine the brain. Mysteriously, a semi-automatic pistol that Mr. Turner reportedly kept loaded in the side of his recliner, as well as an estimated 11 to 13 other guns kept in the household, were removed on the night of Mr. Turner's death by a man purporting to be a family friend. The man told police he removed the guns at the request of Mr. Turner's widow, an assertion she strongly denied. Dinah Turner said she had not spoken to the man in 5 to 6 years. When the man brought the pistol to the sheriff on the day following Mr. Turner's death, police found it strange that the gun had been taken apart and cleaned. Ford County Sheriff's LT Pat Duffy said that once the autopsy revealed a gunshot wound in Mr. Turner's head, investigators began looking for the pistol in photographs of the fire scene taken by Shane Arndt, a certified inspector and special agent with the Office of the Illinois State Fire Marshal. In one photo, investigators found the pistol's muzzle to be facing backward and placed pointing down in the right side of a recliner where Mr. Turner's body was found. The gun's location placed it near Mr. Turner's right side. Duffy said a total of 5 shells were eventually recovered from the scene, although only 4 were initially found. Duffy said those to arrive first at the scene reported hearing some pops from inside the house that they thought might have been ammunition cooking off from the heat of the fire. However, Duffy emphatically stated the 5 pistol rounds did not cook off, they were fired. Duffy explained that was clear because of the striations found on the spent casings. Those striations were formally tested and found to be a match to Mr. Turner's pistol. Duffy said witnesses in the area reported seeing no vehicles present before the fire or leaving the scene afterward. Dinah Turner testified that both she and her 20-year-old son had left the house for their respective jobs early in the day, and that she was notified of the fire about 10:20 am while at her job in Bloomington. When asked if Mr. Turner could have had enemies, Dinah Turner said the various medications he kept on hand to control his various diseases could be the only reason she could think might cause someone to want to harm him. According to Bayo, Mr. Turner had chronic conditions of Huntington's disease, multiple sclerosis and emphysema. Flessler read notes from Mr. Turner's personal physician, internist Dr. Omajeda of Gibson City, indicating that Mr. Turner was a heavy tobacco user, had a history of alcohol and caffeine use, and was a medical marijuana user. Dinah Turner said that, while her husband kept a loaded revolver in the side of his recliner, there was never a bullet in the chamber. She also noted that her husband would be unable to rack a bullet into the chamber on his own due to his right hand being mostly useless to him and the severe shaking the diseases caused in him. The pistol notably was found near Mr. Turner's right side, the same side that Dinah Turner testified he had little use of. Mr. Turner was right-handed, she said. Dinah Turner noted that when her husband tried to fire the pistol, the recoil caused him to smack his forehead. She said he had little control of it because he shook uncontrollably due to his condition. She said she had to assist him with most of the basic activities of daily living. Dinah Turner testified that her husband could have picked up the pistol with one hand, but positively could not have fired it without using both hands. Jurors asked about the weight of the weapon, and Doran provided a similar weapon for them to examine. 2 female jurors held it and found it surprisingly heavy. Dinah Turner testified to the couple's loving and close relationship. She also described Mr. Turner's daily routine of being mostly in a recliner and watching television. She said he used a wheelchair to let the couple's 2 dogs out or to go to the kitchen for snacks as needed. Things were great, she testified. We were happy. She described happy outings with friends during the weekend before his death. Killian asked Dinah Turner whether her husband suffered mood swings or depression that can be related to Huntington's disease. She characterized his only negative emotion as being angry if he fell. Dinah Turner also described the home's layout, indicating it had 3 entrances. The deck exit had a wheelchair ramp. She also said that Mr. Turner had a window next to the recliner chair. My husband would have thrown himself out that window to get to me. Dinah Turner said of his potential escape if the fire was accidental. He was a fighter. Jim Cook, a 20-year friend of Mr. Turner, said the last time he saw Mr. Turner was about 2 weeks before his death. He said Mr. Turner was happy, and the two went shooting. Mr. Turner was in a wheelchair and had to be assisted to hold up his gun. Aunt determined the area of origin of the fire that burned the house down was the dining room area at floor level. However, Aunt said he was unable to locate an exact point of origin, which he said is a common problem in fire investigations. Mr. Turner's recliner was located in the northwest part of the living room, near the interior doorway between the living room and dining room. Aunt said that due to the house being older, the framing allowed the fire to quickly travel to the second floor and the attic once it was in the home's walls. Flessner said he declared the time of Mr. Turner's death to be 11 AM. The time he arrived at the scene. Aunt said Mr. Turner's body had been removed by firefighters before he arrived there. A toxicology report provided by NMS Labs of Willow Springs, PA, showed caffeine, nicotine and cannabinoids were present in Mr. Turner's body. In 2003 in my hometown, someone decided to burn down a playground. This was in a very small rural town. The nearest playground aside from that one was 15 miles away. This playground was decent size too, and I believe it was made possible by a donation from someone in town. It was mostly wood with rubberized mesh, steel bars, and large plastic slides. Nobody ever figured out who did it. It's not really unsolved, but definitely a weird one. There was a row of terraced houses next to the church. The one closest was occupied by two women, a mother and daughter, both who had some mental incapacities. They basically only left the house to walk to the supermarket. As the mother got older, only the daughter went out. Eventually, no one was leaving the house. The garden, which was already overgrown, got out of control. The poor structural condition at the back of the house worsened. This part was connected to the neighboring house, and after receiving no response, eventually the neighbors contacted the Environment Agency out of fear for their own house. The Environment Agency came round, received no response at the door, and so called the police to assist with access. Inside, letters were piled up behind the door. A desk fan was oscillating. The daughter was found on the floor, dead. Had been for quite some time. Investigators come in and start searching the house. Bills were on direct debits and had all been paid automatically. The inhabitants had been hoarders. The house took a very long time to sort through. Eventually, they realized they were missing someone. Where was the mother? They had to keep searching through the house, searching for any evidence of the mother, where she'd gone. In the bathroom, there was a huge pile of things on top of the bath. Mattresses, blankets, towels. Underneath all this, they found the mother's body, wrapped in a blanket, practically mummified, such that it was impossible to ascertain how long she'd been dead for. It just disturbs me. I walked past that house every day. I thought it was abandoned. My small town doesn't have a homeless problem. We have a strangely common occurrence of homeless people walking at night, drunk, and falling asleep or hitting their heads and passing out on train tracks. It's strange. Like everyone that is homeless in the town just falls asleep on the tracks then gets run over by a train. So yay, virtually zero homeless people ever. Many years ago, a house up the street from us burned down. By the time firefighters got there, it was completely engulfed, and a new home would have to end up being built. The man who lived there set it ablaze on purpose not long before going upstairs and shooting himself. Although his house was in complete destruction, with the fire yet to be put out, nobody expected him to be alive. This turned out to be true, but what they weren't expecting was that his body wasn't burned at all. The flames had avoided his body completely. It's unsolved because no one really knows why he killed himself or what the purpose was of burning down his house in the process. It's also a mystery as to how the fire didn't reach him. Too long didn't read man killed himself after setting his home on fire, with no one knowing why. Yes, my family is from the small town where a prominent cult founder was born. A town of about 1,000. Back 25-30 years ago, my uncle was on city council when the cult came to town and offered boatloads of money to build a shrine and improve infrastructure. They didn't have the bad reputation at that point quite yet that they do now. The majority of city council was drooling over the cash. But my uncle 12 angry men at the situation. Seeing the writing on the wall, that this was a step off a cliff to becoming overrun. One of the people he never convinced was the sheriff. But he still got his numbers. Unfortunately, he would receive harassing phone calls every night, and would frequently have cars parked outside his house at odd hours. Everyone knows everyone, population 1000. Remember. And these were not locals. It came to a head when his house got broken into and letters were left threatening my aunt and cousins, who were young children at the time. Status got involved, and the behavior immediately stopped. A few days later the cultists packed up and left. Officially, the threats and break-in were never solved, though every once in a while they would still get odd phone calls and blank letters in the mail. Anthrax scare. Unofficially, everyone knows. A few years later my uncle and family moved out into the country, and all the harassment stopped. There was a woman who died 7 years ago. They found her in the snow in abandoned dirt road naked. This was in the night, and nobody know that what she does here. Somebody raped her, and she is frozen. Nobody know who done this, but the cops not investigate so long time. They are closed the case. My beach town, there was this beautiful old house like in Dawson's Creek. It was still in great shape. A lovely house on the bluffs, overview of the lake, and 200 plus years old. It's on a dead-end street with no paved roads and tiny cottages and families and old cows who garden. Well, 10 years ago this super rich couple from out of town tore it all down, and every tree on the lot, which is illegal. Our trees are ancient, and they built this hugmanous metal and grey concrete monolith in its place. Think the house in Parasite. The house was so massive and expensive it took them over 3 years to build. So the family moved in before it was down and paid for. But that's just it. They never finished. Their money never materialized. And the couple, they disappeared. Right before the banks came calling. Year after year this hollow steel cage sits rotting and slowly collapsing. The neighboring fauna and flora slowly encroaching and reclaiming the hollow beast. Many have tried to get their hands on this huge lot. It has good bones they say. Many have tried to get a peek, but only return with horror stories of the life cycle of a raccoon corpse, or haunting pain of falling through stolen unfinished hardwood floor, long softened by cruel winters and neglect. Fences come and go. Neighbors complain and grow tired anew of its ugly sight and wasted space. The only evidence of its sole, yet brief inhabitants is just as odd, for they went by fake names they shed just as easily. On Google Maps there is one blurry shadow and darkened outline of man's figure reading a book by the far window. He is sitting on a sofa by an electric fireplace in dead of winter. The room is otherwise vacant, completely unfurnished and very unwelcoming. It was the coziest the neighbors ever saw it. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.